Okay, let's sit nice and tall, close the eyes. And just take a moment to land softly. Draw all your energy in to the heart. Bring your awareness, your consciousness to the very center of your heart space. Allow yourself to witness the pool of peace that exists there. Allow yourself to know that this peace is yours. It doesn't exist outside of you. It's only you, and it's all yours. Each one of us has this. And when we share this, we come together in a very powerful way. So set an intention right now that the world, all the beings of the world, should come to know their inner peace and share that peace as a bright light, guiding the way to unity, to compassion, to healing. And placing the right hand on the heart, left hand over the right. We'll lift our voices in one Om. Take a breath in. Bowing the head to the heart. And then draw the face to center, release the hands. So we bow the head to the heart as an act of humility to say, I'm still growing, I'm still learning, I'm still releasing, I'm still practicing, I'm still... Hi, Karen. How are you? Good to see you. So we bow our head to the heart. We also bow our head to the heart in acknowledgement of the grace of divinity, the grace of the sacred. And that grace is not just outside of us, it's within us. It's right here. It's at the core of our very being. And we bow our head to honor each other. To say, there may be times where I'm violent, there may be times where I'm thoughtless, there may be times where I'm presumptive, there may be times where I'm whatever. But when I move past those things, the only thing that remains is love. And so let me be humble enough to honor that love and to bring that forth more often. And more often and more often and more often. Rather than the rest of it. We bow our head for so many reasons. It's a reminder of so many things. So as always, when we come to Wisdom Circle on Sundays, there's a lot of things I really would love to talk about. But every once in a while, I step back a little bit and I ask you, what do you want to talk about? I see eyebrows going up. Does anybody have questions? Or some subject that they've been curious about that they would like to start off today's conversation? Yes?
The readings that you've been reading of the Tao, when was that written? Was that the 168 AD?
No, the 168 BC was the original medical postural catalog that was written in, I believe it's the coast of China, is where they found that. Let me just take a look. Off the top of my head, I'm not remembering the date of the Tao, but I'll tell you in 2 seconds. Tao Te Ching. And if anybody else already knows the date, save me the time and speak up. I do know that it was written in response to Confucianism. So 600 BCE by Lao Tzu, 600 BCE. And so it was a response to the tyranny of the government, or what was perceived as the tyranny of the government, and as a pointer for a different way of doing things. Rather than being a warrior caste, there was another way of doing things. Rather than taxing the people and exploiting the land and exploiting power, that there was another way of doing things. And so it really was a response. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful scripture. And if you haven't read it yet, the Tao Te Ching, it's worth the read many, many times over again. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Could you talk about brahmacharya as a householder in today's day and age?
Sure, absolutely. It's a really great question, actually. So it's helpful if we understand that at the time the yamas and the niyamas were expounded, at the time that they were written down, they were understood long before that, but at the time they were written down, the yamas and niyamas being the 10 virtues of yoga and Advaita Vedanta and Hinduism and many other traditions, they were written down by a sannyas for sannyasas. So it's a sannyas, it's an individual, it's like a monk or a renunciate or a teacher who has renounced the outside world and moved inward in order to come closer to God. And so initially they were written kind of with reflection to that. But Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, he did an amazing thing. He took these teachings, which tended to be a bit secretive, especially in some areas, very, very secretive, and he made them accessible to anybody who could read. Because he was the first one to actually write down the technology of yoga. And that's what the Yoga Sutras are. It's kind of like a technical manual. And in there he says, you should practice these. And he says householders. I just had this conversation with someone not too long ago, actually, who said the yamas and the niyamas are only meant for, the people who have renounced the world. They're not meant for your typical practitioner. And I said, I'm sorry, but I differ with you on that. Because Patanjali states in there, and Krishna also states in the Bhagavad Gita, that the householder who practices these virtues will derive the greatest benefit, because their suffering will diminish and their happiness will become prosperous. And they will become the cohesiveness that holds society together, instead of putting all of that power and unity into the hands of some abusing authority. Okay? So I elaborated there a bit, but anyway. So what are the yamas and the niyamas? Non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, economy of energy, non-grasping. Those are the first 5. And those are considered to be virtues that we should send out into the world, how we should walk through the world first, and then how we should apply to ourselves second, to our innermost self. Then the niyamas, cleanliness, contentment, we have discipline, and we have brahmacharya, being a student of God, and we have Ishwara Pranidhana, devotion. What is brahmacharya? Well, a brahmacharya is a title. Brahmacharya is a title. A brahmacharya is an individual who has taken an oath to live by the word of God. That's the most basic understanding of brahmacharya. It is a title. It is an individual, male or female, who has taken the oath to live by the way of God. Brahmacharya. Brahma, God, not male or female, divine consciousness. Charya, student of. So the student of God. A brahmacharya as a householder is an individual who recognizes that there is an immense amount of suffering in the way of human governing, in the way of human exploitations, in the way in the ways of the material world. There's a lot of problems there. There's a lot of violence there. There's a lot of ignorance there. Ignorance is our number one issue as human beings. So a person who takes a vow of brahmacharya within themselves is saying, I'm going to dedicate my life to living in alignment with that divine consciousness more and the material world less. And the reason why it's so important for the householder to consider this is because the householders are the ones who can change the world. Like really change the world. They're the ones who go to the marketplace. They're the ones who work in the, wherever they work, the warehouses, the manufacturing, the stores. They're the ones who have the day-to-day interactions with one another. So when the householder adopts the practice of brahmacharya, adopts the practice of living the life of virtue, led by compassion, then that is powerful. It said, and I don't recall the scripture right now, but it said, the householder who abides in the virtues of yoga is no longer a burden to society. No longer a burden to society. What is it to be a burden to society? Is to be a violence within society. To be violent within society. For those who were in the yin class, we read parts of the Tao, and in the Tao it states, countries who stockpile weapons go to war. People who stockpile defenses are looking to battle other people, whether they acknowledge it or not. But the ones who put the weapons away, the ones who live by love and compassion and acceptance and straightforward discernment and discipline, those people are no longer a burden on anybody else. In other words, there's so many different ways we can say this. You don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not going to contribute to your suffering. I'll be one less suffering influence in the world. You will be one less suffering influence in the world. And when you think about it, no matter who it is that we're talking about, what do we say that we want for people? We say we want people to be happy and free from suffering. What causes people suffering? The greatest thing that causes people suffering is fear. What is fear? Fear of what? Fear of death. Fear of death, we're not going to die for a really long time. There's not just one death. There's a death in every single moment. And so there's the fear of the death of my peaceful moment for the sake of your anger. There's the fear of the death of my finances. There's the fear of the death of my relationships. There's the fear of the death of everything. It's the fear of change. But when we live by the way of the divine, when we live by the way of love and acceptance and a willingness to do the work and let go of the outcome, when we live by the way of compassion, what we're saying is, you don't need to be afraid of me anymore because my interest doesn't lie in conquering you. My interest lies in conquering myself. And that's not a negative thing. To conquer the self is to say, I understand the limitations of this human persona that I have put together for myself. I understand the limitations of that. And I'm willing to go bigger and deeper and get to know who I really am. So brahmacharya is really a necessary step on a spiritual path. Initially, we might come to the path and be curious, like, oh, what is this all about anyway? People standing on their head and stuff, kind of crazy, carnivalistic, But then we kind of like start listening, to a little bit of the teachings, and we're like, what's that all about? And so initially, most students come because they're curious, and they're it's a little bit of drama. They're curious. They want to know a little bit. They're like, I want to know a little bit more. And then something something sings true to them. And they say, I need to know more. I need to know more. And curiosity is out the window, and now it's no longer really curiosity. Now it's investment. Now it's, I need to know more because there's something inside of me that is saying this is true. And this is why I do what I do. This is why I have chosen this path. I didn't choose it, it chose me. But this is why. Because that voice said, this is true, and I listened. I listened because I couldn't deny it. We could try to deny it. It'll just keep getting louder. So I chose. And even when I was married, I chose brahmacharya. Even when I was married, you know. Some people will say, well, you can't choose brahmacharya when you're married. And I say, excuse me, well then what am I living by? You know, I'm living by the teachings of the divinity. Teaching the teachings of the mother, the teachings of, you know, the father, the teachings, however you want to put it, the Bible, you know, the Bhagavad Gita, the Devi Mahatmya. They all say the same thing. When you get down to the crux of the matter, they all say the same thing. You know where the problem lies? The problem lies in the human ego that says, well, I read the book, and the book says this. And because I say the book says this, all other books are wrong. And it's like, no. It states in the Baha'i tradition and in many other Eastern traditions, it says that, meaning God, will come to us at different points in time when it's needed. And it will show up for us in different ways, depending upon the temperament of the world and the people inhabiting the world at that time. And no single book tells you the entire truth. It tells you part of the truth from a perspective in time when it was presented to those who needed it. And the only way that you get to the entire truth is if you accept all the books, in other words, the scriptures, all the prophets, all the names of God, and all the creation of God. That's the way that you uncover the truth, discover the truth, remember the truth, is when you accept all of it. And the Baha'i is like the third or fourth line in one of the beautiful writings. It says, you know, no one prophet carried the truth. The truth is found when you bring all the teachings of all the prophets together. No one church tells the truth. You only see the truth when you bring all the teachings of all of the sacred books of the churches together. No one person knows the entire truth. You will know the entire truth when all people come together as one. Then you will know the truth. Until then, it'll just be an impression in your mind. But to live by the way of brahmacharya is to say, even if I don't understand completely what unity is, even if I can't put words completely to what that is, I will live as best I can by what the teachings share with me and by what my heart guides me in a compassionately disciplined manner, as best I can to realize unity. To realize unity, because that's the true way. That's the way of divinity, is unity. So brahmacharya is a necessary step, and not everybody is going to follow it the same. There's not like one way to do it. It's not, it's not you dive off the cliff and suddenly you're all in the water at the same place. And no, some people stick their toe in the water. Some people just stand on the shore. Some people take the dive. Some people quit smoking. Some people stop drinking. Some people stop cursing. Some people set New Year's intentions and hopefully keep them. We all are on different paths in our life. And so we hope, it's the hope, it's the inherent potential that each one of us continually refines ourselves, bringing ourselves closer and closer and closer to the goodness that already exists within us. And that we take these coverings that we've put up in defense of ourselves away. That we put them away. That we realize we don't need them anymore. And the more that we're able to put those coverings, those layers of disguise away, the tough layer, right? And the I don't care layer, and the I'm going to keep you at a distance layer, all those different layers, the more that we put those away, the more we see clearly the potential of brahmacharya. So everything has a potential and everything has an actual. And the potential of brahmacharya is what we see from a distance when we objectify brahmacharya, and we say, well, DJ might be able to take the vow of brahmacharya as a householder, but I never could. No way. There's got to be something special about him. This is our downfall. If anyone decides to take a vow of brahmacharya as a householder, it's not because they can and you can't. It's because they've chosen to be the example so that you could muster the courage necessary to follow your own path, which maybe leads to that too. So if you speak to somebody who is a very rigid interpretationist interpreter of the teachings, they'll say brahmacharya is a very special area for a very particular person, and they're not lying to you. There is a title, right? So if a householder takes a vow of brahmacharya, you're not going to call them brahmacharya DJ, brahmacharya Kelly. You're not going to call them that. You would call a sadhu, someone who, or a student who lives at an ashram who has taken the vow of brahmacharya with a teacher. You call them brahmacharya. But that doesn't mean you can't practice its tenets. You can. And I would even go as far as to say, if you truly wish to experience less suffering in this life, you should. Because it's a guarantee that it will reduce your suffering if you live by the way of love and by the way of acceptance. But whenever I talk about this, I always want to make sure there's one thing that's really clear, though. Because there's this virtue that comes before brahmacharya called tapas. And in the yoga world, it's very sad because tapas is like kind of demeaned down to sweat. And can you tell it gets me a little aggravated? Gets me just a little aggravated. Certainly, sweat is important, but we have to go beyond the physical body into tapas and the discipline that tapas is. Tapas is discipline. It is the ability to see through one's own stories to the truth of a matter and be with that truth no matter what the ego says. So tapas is a very, very important virtue for all of us to cultivate. Tapas is what brings clarity. Tapas is what cultivates strength and courage. Tapas is what gives an individual the ability to take a vow of brahmacharya, whether it's an official vow or it's a heartfelt vow, and live by that vow unceasingly. Tapas is in part, great part, what permits that to happen. So if we don't have the discipline, and it's not, as I always say, it's not a cold, hard discipline, unless it has to be, right? You know when you got to call yourself on your own stuff. You got to be a little firm with yourself. You got to use the mom voice, right? Yeah. How many of you know what the mom voice is? Right? Totally. My kids, when they hear the mom voice come out, they go the other way. Even now, at the age of 40 and 38. Jay was in the car with me not too long ago, and the mom voice came out, and he was like, I can't go anywhere. I was like, captive. Yeah. So sometimes we have to use that voice on ourselves when we're just a little too, tied up with our own drama. Because that self-discipline, that ability to draw ourselves away from what causes us to suffer, unnecessarily, requires discipline. It does. The other thing we need to do is put away excuses. We need to no longer accept excuses. I'm sorry if you had a bad day. It's not an excuse. It's a story. I'm sorry if someone was mean to you. It's not an excuse. It's a story. And it may be something that you need to address, and it may be something that you need to face, but it's not an excuse for poor behavior. It's not an excuse to be violent in the world. It's not. And so as you go deeper into these teachings, whether it's the teaching of brahmacharya alone, and if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that Swami Shivananda, could be Swami Vivekananda, but one of the Swamis in the Shivananda path have a book called Brahmacharya, and it talks very much about it. It's quite eloquent and beautiful. As we go deeper into these teachings, it opens the truth up for us, and we begin to see why the virtues are taught, why they're taught. Now, there's some trainees here for the weekend, and we were talking yesterday about some different scriptures, and we said, there is the Vedas and the Upanishads, and they're very ancient. They're thousands of years old. And then you come a little bit more current in time to around 1200, 1300 AD, and you have a manual that's written called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And this is the Hatha Yoga Manual. And in the Hatha Yoga Manual, they don't talk about virtues. And they don't necessarily talk about meditation and samadhi. They talk about asana, posture. They talk about pranayama, the breathing practices. They talk about mudras, the gestures. They talk about mantras. They talk about ritual. And they say, or the Swami who wrote that said, there's no virtues in there. He said, because if you take virtues to the average human being who really believes only in their suffering, they can't use the virtues. It's not accessible to them because they don't believe in them. So you can't bring the virtues to that person. It will literally, if they try to force it, it will drive them mad. So you have to meet that person where they're at. And where they're at is the physical body. So you start with the asana. And then he adds a caveat. And he says, but every single student should be monitored by their teacher, because the ultimate end is establishment of virtuousness in the heart, establishment of the peaceful nature in life, and establishment of an intimate relationship with divinity. So even though it's not part of their primary method, it is still acknowledged as being the point of the matter. The point of the matter. The tradition that I practice, virtues are absolutely important, 100%. It's like, if you want to live a life that has less suffering in it, you need to know A, what causes the suffering, and then B, you need to acquire the skills to change those behaviors. Even if you perceive those behaviors are coming from other people. Like, I can never be happy until these people do that or that person does this. No, that's not really true. The reality is that you have made a choice to allow their behavior to steal your happiness from you, your joy from you, your peace from you. And you have the equal ability to change your mind and to say, I will not allow that person's behavior to steal my joy, to rob me of my peace. Swami Shraddhananda was known for saying, in yoga there's this concept of non-grasping, and it's a little bit misunderstood sometimes. He said, instead of thinking like I can't hold on to anything, it's a very frightening concept. I have to let go of everything. Oh my gosh. He said, look at it this way. Hold on to one thing. Peace. Hold on to one thing. Inner peace. Grasp onto that. but not so much so that you suffocate it, right? So that's a great question, DJ. Brahmacharya, absolutely. And there's so more that could be said on that. But I will ask if anybody else has anything that they would like to ask. Miss Kelly.
Well, of course. I think that all plays into when you started with grace and the discipline. So how do we allow ourselves the grace, but also put forth the discipline? You know, I feel like there's just this fine line of allowing yourself the grace, but then you can go, at least for myself, I allow too much grace, I feel, sometimes. How do we balance that? How is that?
If it's too much, it's not grace.
Yeah.
If it's too much, it's not grace.
True that. But how do we, so
if it's not grace, what is it?
There's a few inappropriate words.
Well, use the least inappropriate word. If it's not grace, what is it?
It's almost as if I'm still enabling the suffering.
Okay. That's not grace.
Right.
Grace does not suffer or cause suffering. Right? So what that is the opposite of grace, which is ignorance. Oh yeah. That's ignorance. That's ignorance creeping up and saying, I'm going to make you think I'm grace. Call me grace. We all do it, don't we? Right? We do. That's not grace. That's ignorance. And it's a very kind of a slippery slope, because we hear the word grace, or we hear the word discipline, and we associate a particular meaning to it, a particular essence to it. And I'm going to give one example that doesn't have to do with you. In the yoga world today, particularly in the West, freedom. Oh, what a bastardized word. Like, seriously. Freedom. Right? Freedom in yoga. Well, yoga taught me about my freedom. I can do whatever I want to do, and the hell with you if you don't like it. That's not freedom. That's violence. That's violence. That's not grace. That's ignorance. So I'm going to hurt you so I can be free? That's not freedom. I'm creating bondage to suffering. I'm causing suffering. I'm saying I don't care about you. That's violence. So that's not grace. That's not freedom. What is freedom? Freedom is the ability to love anyway. Freedom is the ability to accept anyway. Freedom is the ability to stand anyway, to stay anyway. Now, freedom is the ability to know what to do and to do it. And to not feel that you need to relinquish that voice that speaks inside of each one of us for the sake of your or anyone else's ego. I oftentimes have people who will say something like, I really want to do this, but I'm really afraid of what my spouse will say. And it's like, I understand that, and I respect their fear. But the reality is if you allow your spouse to dictate your spiritual path, and it's not your spiritual path, it's your spouse's. I had a husband come to me one time for a very long-term student of mine who wanted to come into our yoga teacher training. And he said to me, can you guarantee me that if she comes and does your training, she's not going to divorce me after? And I said, I'm not making you any promises, because just the fact that you have to ask me that question. Just the fact that you have to ask me that question should tell you a little something. So I said, I can't make any guarantees like that because I don't know what her path holds for her, and I don't know what your path holds for you. And if it's together, wonderful, so happy for you. And if it's not together, wonderful, so happy for you. You know, that's your issue. Yeah. So we can't make choices based on fear of what other people will say or do, no matter how close those people are to us, even if it's us. Well, how am I going to feel if I do that? If I stop cursing? But what if I get really mad? Saying that word really makes me feel good. I know what I'll do. I'll have a yoga class where all we do is curse. And I'll say it's healthy for us. And I'll pull up some obscure research and prove it. Right? That's not freedom. That's not freedom.
So is that taking this idea of grace, like you said, into ignorance?
Yeah.
And just sort of, and then that the idea of discipline as well brings up the ability to have the grace but not beat yourself up over it, which would be the discipline aspect as well. Yes.
So the discipline would be, grace is there. Whether you acknowledge it or not, grace is always with us. Discipline is the ability to accept that and not exploit it. To accept it and not exploit it for the perpetual benefit of the ego. And so when we say grace, we say, so let's just say that I have some bad behaviors or some harmful behaviors, we'll call them, I don't like the word bad, some harmful behaviors. And I say to myself, well, you know, these behaviors are really no longer in line with the path that I'm investing in now. You know, the changes that I'm investing in. So I'm gonna work to stop these behaviors, to change these behaviors, to evolve them into something else. And then maybe one of those behaviors is drinking excessively. Friday night comes along and my BFF calls me on the phone and says, hey, let's go out for some martinis. And I'm like, well, and I'm thinking and I'm having this battle in my mind, which is very natural because the part of me is saying, you made a promise to yourself that you were going to try to change this behavior, but I could change tomorrow and just go tonight. And that way my BFF isn't mad at me, right? So I'm turning myself away from what I feel I have chosen in this life to surrender to for the sake of someone not being mad at me. Now, that's a moment where I need to stop myself and I need to be really honest. Honesty. And the honesty is this. Okay, I'm on the phone with my BFF and I'm about to turn away from this vow that I'm trying to make in my life for the sake of them not being angry with me. And I'm having some doubts in this moment about my own strength and courage to be able to follow through on my convictions. So now I'm going to sit here and I'm going to make a choice. And I'm going to make a choice knowingly. And if I make the choice to turn my back, I know that the path is still there. I know that the teachings are still there. I know I can come back to it at any point in time. But I also know that by making this choice, I'm making it harder to come back. If I make this choice, I'm making it harder to come back. And I have to name these things. You have to name the demon, right? So if I make this choice to go because I'm afraid of this person not liking me, which is really just a big old excuse for I want to go have fun, or what the ego perceives of as fun, I have to understand that I am putting a wall of guilt, I am putting a wall of shame, I am putting a wall of I'll choose something else between me and what my heart is calling me to. And you need to be really honest about that and make an honest decision. And then if you choose to go out and party, you choose to go out and party. Go party it up, man, because the guilt you're going to have for it, you know, is going to be overwhelming, right? So be prepared. Have the skills to recover. That's not necessarily grace, though. That's the battle. You know what is the grace? The grace is when you say, I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not really sorry. I'm going to share this with you, that I've made a vow to myself to change my life, and I hope you'll be happy for me about it, but if you're not, that's your choice. Why don't you come over and we'll watch a movie? That's the grace. The grace is having the empowerment within yourself to make the choice that is least violent, least harmful for you first. Why you first? Shouldn't it be about other people first? It can't be about other people first. Because as long as you're hurting yourself, you're hurting others. Even if you think you're helping them. But when you stop hurting yourself, then you will understand the ways that you hurt others. You will see it very clearly, and then you'll stop. But as long as you're hurting yourself, it doesn't really matter what you do to other people, because you're so lost in your own suffering. So you have to come first. It's not to say stop being of service in society. That's not what I'm saying. Go work in the food kitchens. Go serve. Serve, absolutely, while you're in the midst of this amazing battle, because service is the quickest way to heal thyself. But don't think that your service is don't think that your service has evolved to the point of perfection, because it has not yet. Right? It hasn't. Service becomes what we could call perfection when it is done in the light of pure love only. Only. No expectation for even a thank you. No expectation. You know how hard that is? Think about the last time you bought someone a birthday present and they didn't appreciate it. Right? Think about the last time you held the door open for somebody and they just kind of brushed by you. And you were like, well, that's the last time I do that for that idiot. Right? Think how hard it is to even make the smallest tiny little act selfless. You really, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to make our acts selfless unless we ourselves stop harming ourselves. So we have to kind of walk hand in hand with both those things. Continue to serve and continue to change and grow and evolve and improve. It's a great question. Did I answer it? Who asked that question? Oh, Kelly. Did I answer it well enough for you? Okay, good. Other questions? Yes, Carissa.
Not necessarily a question, but I guess so. But when you just use that example about buying someone a birthday gift and they didn't appreciate it, I think that's something that I struggle with, not just because, it's something I've bought and spent money on, I think it's more so I get upset because I want people to be able to show gratitude.
Why?
Because I know how much gratitude has helped me in my own life.
So what do you want from the gratitude?
I see.
Do you all understand? Yeah. It's like, make me happy. But that's not why you bought him a gift. Potentially. Right? Beautiful story. Swamiji was here visiting, and he asked me to accompany him to a traditional dance that is done. Girls in India study for a very long time in traditional dance, and they have kind of a coming out, party where they go on stage and they do these beautiful dances to the scriptures, and all the families come together and the whole community just cheers them on. It's so beautiful. And so Swamiji was the guest of honor at this, and he asked me to accompany him there. So I did. So we pull up in the car, we open the door for him, he gets out, and this devotee comes running over with this beautiful bouquet of flowers. I mean, I've never seen a bouquet like this before. The thing was huge. Lilies and flowers I've never seen before, and roses, and he gives it to him, and he's like, oh, Swamiji, I got these for you. And Swamiji's like, they are so stunning and so beautiful. And he said, thank you, and the man standing right there, and Swamiji turns to me and he goes, well, I was Sudha then, Sudha, this is for you. And I looked at him. And the man said, enjoy. Took no offense. Of course not. Because what is Swamiji going to do with this huge bouquet of flowers but give them to his devotees? Of course he is. So I followed his suit, and I took the bouquet apart, and I gave them to everybody. And so many different people were walking around with flowers. It was beautiful. We're not meant to have things and keep them, right? We're meant to receive and give, receive and give, receive and give. We should be like running water that way. The stream bed doesn't just keep the water. The water flows through. And the stream bed doesn't just keep the water, even though some of the water becomes absorbed into the bed of the stream. That water goes out to what? The roots of the local plants. Creates little puddles for the insects and frogs and turtles. Nothing is for us, and yet everything is for us. So maybe the greater gift in buying someone a present is not that they'll be happy with you, or that they'll make you happy by being grateful for the present. Maybe the greater gift is that in giving the gift, you get to practice non-attachment. You get to practice non-attachment. And in doing so, you empower yourself to come to the place where you do not depend upon other people's satisfaction for your own happiness. Because I tell you, if we depend upon everybody else saying thank you to be happy, we're never going to be happy. Nope. Never. Doesn't work that way. Great question. Yes?
Okay, so when we talk about like accepting all like history of books, right, like doctrines or what we would consider religion and stuff like that, and then I'm just curious, like from a Hindu's perspective, when it comes to like the world as a whole, and we're aware that there are very violent religions that people follow suit, where they have like children soldiers essentially, and like the suicide bombers and stuff like that. Like it's like, I guess I'm not really sure how to frame this question, because it's like I feel like we want to sing like, not like sing Kumbaya at one corner, but then it's like how do you even reach that far? Because it's like the world as a whole that's like a manifestation of its sickness.
It's a great question. And what I'll say in response to that is that there's a difference between scriptural teachings unadulterated by human minds and the stuff that's put out there by humans. In India, the Bhagavad Gita is the Bhagavad Gita. The Vedas are the Vedas. The Upanishads are the Upanishads. And the scriptures themselves have never been rewritten, or at least many of them have never been rewritten. They are commentated on. So there are thousands of commentaries. You know, you go get Eknatheshwaran's Bhagavad Gita. The story is, the scriptural story is there of the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, and it's basically, for the most part, the same. The Sanskrit is always the same. The interpretation by the translator might be different, but the Sanskrit is always the same. It's never been rewritten. Eknatheshwaran then says, kind of in a side note, so this is my thoughts on this. And the commentary by the human being is understood as completely different and separate than the spirituality of the scripture. So what Jesus Christ said, what he said, his words, not the retelling of the stories necessarily, right? Not the reinterpretation of the Bible, which has had pages torn out of it and thrown away, and has pages added to it. That's not the teaching of Christ. Christ didn't do that. So we need to understand the difference between the authenticity of what is being brought to us by the multitude of religions and that which has come forward because of the angry hearts of humans. Divinity is not invested in war. It's not. The only thing that's invested in war is human. Human frail ego is invested in war. Divinity doesn't make soldiers out of children. People do. So when we're talking about these things and violent religions, those are man's religions. That's not divinity. That's man's religion. So wherever, and the other thing that I would say, there's a lot I would say about this, but the other thing I would say about this is kind of a good guide is to ask yourself about violence and to say, is what this person is saying, is what this person is proselytizing, is what this person is preaching contributing to violence? Are they suggesting separation? Are they suggesting that we're better than somebody else? Are they suggesting that their way is the only way? And if they are, I suggest go find yourself a different interpretation, because that's not aligned with unity. I can say to you that I personally disagree strongly with some of the practices of Santeria. Does anybody know what Santeria is? Santeria is an island-based religion that utilizes animal sacrifice, right? I'm not going to tell you they're wrong, because that's their tradition. But I'm going to say that I would not do it. I would not do it. But they do it because that's their tradition. That's what they believe. That's what they have their connection to. So I'm not going to judge them, but I might work for animal rights in the world, right? So it's a really kind of it's a trick. It's a bit of a tricky trail to follow, because this compassion, this acceptance is saying, I completely accept that there are people out there who take children and make them soldiers. I completely accept that there is the atrocity of war throughout the world and that there are bombs and loss of life and families torn apart. I completely accept that there is immigration crisis in the world right now and that there are diseases all over the world. I completely accept this. I have to. Because it's happening. But just because I completely accept it doesn't mean I completely accept it as right. No. What it is showing me is what happens to this world and to the people and all the species of this world when human beings give in to their ego and think they are broken beyond repair. When they are power hungry and manipulative and exploitative. It's showing that to me. And it's also showing me another thing. It's showing me perhaps where I can be of service. It's not to say that everybody should run out and, be an advocate for children not being made into soldiers. But how does that relate to local children? Children who are, manipulated. Children locally who are, being led down the avenue of drug use, prostitution, right? Children who are in the foster system who are being abused. Maybe there's something locally we can do to be less of a violence in society and more of a love and more of an example and more of a servant. So it's a slippery slope, and we can keep going because there's many, many other layers too. It's not straightforward.
Just like one quick add-on, so I feel like in Christianity, they would say that is of the devil, right?
Of course they would.
They have this very distinct,
they do say that.
This very distinct line, and I guess I'm wondering is there what would be the parallel in Hinduism? if there was a parallel, what would that be? Because you said from the divine versus from humanity, and that's in my mind kind of what I'm thinking, would be the parallel, I guess.
So before I answer this, we have to remember that India traditionally does not have a concept of hell like Christianity does. Okay, there's not some fire burning pit that you're going to spend some amount of time in. There's not a concept of purgatory like there is either. There is hell on earth. There's the 7 levels of hell on earth, and those have to do with the illness of the ego and the affliction of karma for negative actions, for harmful actions. And so it's called the samsaric cycle. And the cycle is, I'm born, I live for a while, I die, I'm reborn after a period of rest. And the period of rest in between death and rebirth has something to do with the amount of good deeds you committed in this life. So you get a reprieve. And then when the reprieve energy runs out, you come back and work off some more of your karma and collect some other karma. So it's an ongoing cycle. It's called the samsaric cycle of suffering. Now, so that would be the hell, is to have to be reborn back into a state of suffering again. And in many of the teachings, they talk about ending the samsaric cycle. And that means 2 things. The first is that it means the final death, for sure, that you don't have to be reborn again into this material world of suffering. That's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that you commit yourself so fully in this life that when you do come back in the next life, you come back in a state that is not attached to suffering, that is only here to be of service to all the species of the earth. And so we can look at like great saints in that regard, right? Individuals, modern day people like Thich Nhat Hanh and Mother Amma, these people who, they're not your average person when it comes to that. So they're living in the heaven on earth. Because earth is where we exist in this physical body. When we go back to our source, we don't have this physical body. So this physical body is not who we are, but it sure suffers and we sure know it. So in Hinduism, until the proselytization, the arrival of many of the different Christians and Muslims and whatnot down there, India is a very, very large area, and they've been invaded many different times from the north and the east. The south has not been as affected as those other areas as far as incoming religious ideologies. But they didn't traditionally have a hell or a heaven. They certainly had a realm of God. But what is the realm of God but consciousness? To be awake and aware, present, and non-personalized. Right? It would be to be in the realm of God. And to be, the hell would be the realm of suffering. They do now sometimes talk about hell. But again, that's because of the influences coming from outside. Additionally, in Sanatana Dharma and many of all the traditions associated with it, there is not necessarily a devil or an angel. There's a demon. There's a demonic tendency or demonic essence. And we see this in individuals like Mahish Asura, who was part buffalo, part human. And so there's symbology there. And he wreaked havoc on the earth by abusing and exploiting and stealing and causing wars and violence. And so the great battle ensued between he and Mother Durga, and Mother Durga slayed him. She ended his life, but not before she gave him every opportunity to recognize and evolve. But then she saw he's too lost in the ignorance of his own ways, so off the chat. I just like that. She's the original spiritual warrior, by the way. So there are demonic tendencies and demons, and there are There are what we could call angelic tendencies or virtues, and people who are virtuous. But it all plays out here, in this place. Yeah. Great question. So you are your own devil, and you are also your own God. You're your own angel, and you're your own sinner. The question is, and here's the beautiful thing. You've been given free will. You've been given free will. So you are an extension of the flow of the consciousness of divinity. But that doesn't come completely free. You've been given a lot of power. And you have not been given I'm just going to use my power any way I want to make myself happy. I don't care what you say. There's none of that. There's consequence. Consequence is the price we pay for power, for the power of divine consciousness. Consequence. Be careful how you yield that power, because there's karma to be had. There's karma to be had, and there is a cycle of samsara that will be continued. And we are given the free will to make the choice of how to use the power that we've been given, but not without consequence. Not without consequence. Time check. It was so good. I'm only 4 minutes late. I've been trying really hard to be right on time, and I did really good. And I could say up until today we went 4 minutes over. It's okay. This is a great conversation. So any last thoughts from anybody for now, before we break for our wonderful lunch that's waiting for us? No? So everybody's clear? All right, great. Let's sit nice and tall and close the eyes. Take a nice breath in and a nice breath out. And draw the hands together in front of the heart. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Now and always honoring your light and the light of all beings everywhere. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste. Hari Om.